imagine if there was one single food that actually kept you at about 60% of your energy. And for many of us, we actually have those foods, we just don't realize it. We think there's a food reaction has to be something like passing out and vomiting. It actually doesn't. I've got an allergy to bivalves, which are seafoods, and they're oysters and shellfish and things. So, do I have to talk louder? Come closer. Yes, yeah. So I've got an allergy to bivalves, and what that means is whenever I eat a bivalve, like an oyster or a shellfish, I pass out and vomit. And that's what you call a very strong, distinct allergy reaction. That's an allergic reaction. Whereas intolerances and sensitivities are a lot more insipid because they creep up on you over time and they just tend to wear you down. So you end up eating this food that just slowly has you be kind of bloated and tired and at half energy over a long period of time. And it's not until you actually remove that food from your diet that you start to realize the impact that it's actually having on your health. And Trace and I were out once years ago and I was trying to impress her. And she took me to a friend's place of hers, a friend of hers house, and they served, what was it? Oysters? Mussels. Right, mussels is what I'm talking about, mussels. So they served a plate of mussels, and I remember almost vomiting at the smell of these things. And but I was trying to be polite, trying to impress Tracy. It's a very important date for us, And so I ate them and swallowed them and just grimaced, and I wondered when I was eating them why I'd never ever wanted to eat one of these things in my life. And sure enough, within half an hour I'd fallen asleep at the table. And then I crawled over to the couch, and Tracy was not impressed at all, I have to say. But I then crawled over to the couch and fell asleep right through the whole evening. They carried on with the dinner, and I lay there on the couch completely asleep. And woke up at about 2 in the morning, and then started vomiting for hours. I vomited about 4 hours, just dry vomiting over and over. And I have an allergy, I discovered that night, to bivalves. And that's why I never wanted to eat them. My gut instinct was, don't ever go near that food, don't touch it. The moment I ate one, it was awful. I rang my dad, and here's the funny story in terms of having dads here. I rang my dad the next day and said, hi Pop, I had this amazing reaction yesterday. And he said, yes, did I forget to tell you that all the Bennett men have a bivalve allergy? And I went, yeah, thanks Pop, that's great, So, and the funny thing is, both my sons won't go near that kind of food. So we think they've got it as well. So that's the distinction between an allergy and intolerance. So an allergy is very strong, very reactive. For most people it's diarrhea, vomiting, passing out, extreme sleepiness. It's a real violent reaction. Some people go into anaphylactic shock, so there's that whole thing. Intolerance is quite different. And, if there was one singular food that you ate every day that caused bloating and constipation as well as making you tired and keeping your energy down, that would be a good thing to find out. And that food, if you stopped eating it, would transform your weight, transform your health, your digestion. That'd be a really good thing to know. And for me, that was one of those key things. And for me, with my asthma, as part of healing my asthma, I started eating a gluten-free diet. And I didn't really realize how much gluten and wheat products are actually in the modern food supply. And it's not until you really start to look at it that you realize. And it's one of the reasons I talk about GFSS and getting off the foods that are GFSS, which is gluten, fat, salt, and sugar. And that's the deadly combination, those four, and you'll hear me talk about them a lot. And there's a reason why I put gluten at the front, because it is the single biggest trigger for intolerances for people. And what happened to me was when I gave up gluten, which is basically your wheat, your rye, and your barley. I'll cover off oats later on and all the other side products as well. But the keys are wheat, rye, and barley. They're the ones that really contain the irritating glutens. Once I gave those up, I had quite a miraculous process in the body where my asthma started to really drop off dramatically. And I've noticed ever since that since I don't eat gluten, I don't have any asthma at all. And one of those questions to ask, if you're looking at, well, do we notice this kind of thing around the world in terms of reactions from countries? And we do. Now, I used to be in the supplements industry, and I had a presentation given to me once about which countries around the world use which supplements. And when you look at actually the epidemiological studies of which people are getting which diseases, and then what supplements they buy the most of, it's fascinating. Because there's one country in the world that buys the most probiotics per head by a country mile, and it's completely off the chart. Now, probiotics are generally for people suffering from cramping, bloating, pains, digestive disorders, bowel problems, that kind of thing. They've got bad bacteria, it's been worn down by poor diet and things, so they need more probiotic bacteria in their gut. Now, which country do you think it was that uses the most probiotic bacteria? Italy. Now, does anyone know why it would be that the Italians need... Yes, Mark? They eat more gluten, correct. They eat pasta. What do they live on? They live on pasta. And of course, as the generations have grown, they're eating more and more pasta that's more and more commercially made, which is smaller and smaller different varieties of wheat, giving them just essentially one piece of gluten in every meal, one really heavy dose of it. So it's really interesting when you start to look at it, because they don't have the highest level of populations, but in terms of pasta intake and gluten intake, and gluten is inside wheat, which I'll explain later as well. When you remove that, you get miracles. For a lot of people, they get up in the morning, and you might get up in the morning and have, say, toast or Wheat Bix for breakfast, and then for morning tea you have a muffin, and then for lunch you have a nice healthy sandwich, say, and then for afternoon tea you might have a biscuit, and then for dinner you might have pasta, and then for pudding you might have a cake, and then you might have a beer. Right? So there's 6 or 7 meals, all based around gluten. So it's easy to see how common and easy it is for us to eat those kind of meals every single day, over and over and over again, exposing ourselves to the same gluten. And what that does to your intestines is very, very scary. So for me, it was gluten. It made a huge difference. But there are a number of allergenic foods. And the foods in terms of that have the most allergenic rates: dairy, wheat and gluten, things like barley, wheat and rye. Dairy and all the different side effects of dairy, whether it's milk or whether it's whey protein powder or whether it's cheese or yogurt, doesn't really matter. Seafood, fish. Funnily enough, I can eat fish, but I can't eat bivalves, so they get quite distinct. Soybean products, usually based around isolates or flours, peanuts, tree nuts, and also corn, citrus, and strawberries. So you get some people that react quite badly to things like grapefruit or oranges. And then pork, chicken, and beef as well. And obviously they're a lot more tied in with things like salmonella and bugs and bacteria on the actual meat itself. So you get a double whammy. But they're the most common allergenic foods you've got right there. But here's where it gets really interesting. If you're wanting to go on, for instance, if you're wanting to go on an elimination diet, and essentially what we do on the program is an elimination diet, quite a good one. And what you do is when you go on an elimination diet, you actually remove all those triggers. The body starts to rebuild and get healthy. Then you can bring them back in one at a time and see if you get a reaction. So it's a very good, simple process to do. But cross-reaction or cross-sensitivity is when you get one food triggering the reaction of another. And coffee is a classic example. And it's one of those reasons why I go on and on and on and on about giving up coffee. Because if you're on a gluten-free diet, coffee, because 10% of coffee is a protein that actually cross-reacts with gluten antibodies. So if you can be on a gluten-free diet and not be doing as well as you think you are doing, because you've got the coffee stimulating the gluten antibodies and giving you the same bad reactions. And coffee is the number one cross-reacting food there is, and dairy is number 2. So when you're on a gluten-free diet and you're still having coffee and dairy, you start to see how you can actually not get the kind of good results that you'd like to get because the other foods are setting them off. And this means things like coffee, chocolate, caffeine, dairy can attract the same gluten antibodies, particularly coffee, but also you do get it with chocolate. And the 2 main cross-reacting foods are coffee and dairy products. They're the 2 that set us off the most in terms of underlying gluten antibodies. So coffee, just to give you a little reminder about why I don't recommend coffee, on top of being a cross-reactor, it's a dehydrating neurotoxic insecticide, the same as morphine and caffeine and cocaine. And continuous long-term drinking will raise your blood pressure dramatically, increase cortisol production. Cortisol production, of course, increases inflammation, wipes out your adrenal function, and this is one of those reasons why you get addicted to coffee, because you get up in the morning, you're tired, and notice how if you are addicted to coffee or you've got a coffee habit, you'll need it, and once you have it, you feel much perkier and brighter, and it's that caffeine kick that you get. But also what it's doing is it's replacing your adrenal glands. Coffee tends to beat down your adrenal glands and then you get addicted to the kick you get. So you literally need the energy because your adrenal glands are not creating the energy that you require. So when you beat that down, then you have to artificially replace it. It takes 3 or 4 days to get off coffee, and you should expect to have headaches and be unpleasant to be around and all kinds of things like that. But if you do it, you get off at 6 months, and after 6 months you try coffee again and you'll get the shakes like this. And you'll actually see what coffee really does to the human body, because you can feel your blood pressure rising when you have a heavy dose of coffee if you haven't had it for a while. But we get desensitized and we get used to it, and then we get addicted. So it also weakens your nervous system, gives you the shakes. It removes B vitamins, vitamin C, and iron and calcium, and that ties in also with gluten sensitivities as well. It raises your risk of anemia and osteoporosis for the obvious reasons that if something removes iron and removes calcium, it will raise your risk for anemia, which is iron deficiency, and osteoporosis, which is calcium deficiency. It negatively influences your genetic expression. So we talk a lot about influencing your genetics to give you good, strong genetic expression with your genes. It negatively influences that, and it keeps your blood pressure narrowed, which of course gives you higher blood pressure. Blood vessels narrow, sorry, and it's the most common cross-reacting food there is. So of all the foods that cross-react, it's number 1. And it leads to a number of other things like poor skin, Glycation, it removes liquid from the pores, so it gives you poor skin, headaches, weight gain, insomnia, all kinds of things. So again, just a little reminder as to why I don't recommend coffee. And this is very relevant in terms of what we're talking about tonight, because we are talking about allergies, wheat, gluten, breads and things like that work together. And when you remove them, you must remove all of them if you want to get the full result. So that's why it's important to talk about coffee when you talk about bread and wheat. We believe that changes in diet associated with Western lifestyles contribute to the increasing incidences of asthma, type 1 diabetes and other autoimmune diseases. And this comes directly from the Research Centre for Asthma and Airways. So it's very much mainstream science now starting to really recognise that the modern diet is pretty much precursor to the massive explosion of autoimmune disease that we've got. We know the number one cause of death is heart disease. We know number 2 is cancer. Number 3, for many of you might not be aware, is actually autoimmune disease. When you capture all the autoimmune diseases together, they're actually a huge cause of death, particularly in New Zealand. White flour products are one of those things that are part of that problem. The Hunza people, as an example of a centenarian race, very, very healthy group of people, one of the centenarian champions, living to 100 very regularly. In the Himalayas, they traditionally lived very long, healthy lives, and the key thing with them is they have very, very low levels of autoimmune diseases. Now, here's a key thing. They never, ever grind their wheat or their grains until they're about to eat it. So they actually keep stores of grains. They grind just enough for the meal. They don't even grind enough for the day, but just for that meal, then they use it. They actually don't store it over long periods of time at all. During the Industrial Revolution, another interesting thing is that white bread was used to constipate people. Because if you had diarrhea, you'd be given white bread, because it's the most effective way to constipate the human body. And it then becomes a food that we all eat every day, as opposed to realizing it's a great treatment for diarrhea, which of course it is. That's what glue's for. It glues you up. So the whiter the bread, the faster you're dead. I don't recommend you eat white bread at all, period, ever. Don't even look at it as a treat. Wheat and gluten is now in everything, and particularly white bread. It's the spongy aspect that gives it its addictive nature. So when you're looking at something like, if you get up in the morning, you have a piece of toast with a whole lot of butter on it and a coffee, that's your classic combination. They're all going to fight, they're all going to set each other off inside the gut, and they're all going to exacerbate each other and stimulate each other. So it's quite a toxic load to give your gut first thing in the morning. So asthma rates, one of those things that have risen as well, alongside us eating more white flour and more wheat and more of the same gluten. Now occurs in 1 in 4 Kiwis. Maori children are 4 times more likely to die of asthma and 3 times more likely to be hospitalised. And asthma is increasing at about 50% every 12 years. So there's this massive increase around the world. 17% of Australian children have got asthma. It's doubled just in the past 20 years alone. And 5,000 Americans die every single year from asthma. So is asthma a big problem? Yes, it's a huge problem all over the world. New Zealand is a classic case, one of the highest rates. There's now 150 million asthmatics on the planet. And the medical and scientific establishment have no idea of what to do about preventing it or treating it without drugs. No idea at all. So what solutions then can dietary changes offer? Now I'm a classic case of someone who used to be taking a lot of drugs for my asthma as a preventative, as trying to keep rid of it and treat it, with no success at all. Changed my diet, gone onto a plant-based whole food diet, gluten-free diet, asthma went away, it's never come back. Now, has there been times in my adult life in the last 20 years since I cured my asthma where I've had asthmatic symptoms? Yes. And here's the times when, coincidentally, I've had a whole lot of days on wheat and dairy and rubbish, when I've allowed myself to eat some crap. Basically, my chest seizes up. I get mucus here, I get sore lips, I get constipation, I get bloating. And it's always after about 3 or 4 days of rubbish, which is why I don't do it anymore. You know, you learn after the amount of times you try it. You go, I'm not going to do that anymore. Then you learn, right? That's why we're different to rats, right? The funny thing is, rats actually learn faster than we do. If you put them in a cage and you have an electric shock at the end of this little tunnel, and you have some fire at the end of this tunnel, and you have, water at the end of this tunnel, they'll actually go down the electric shock and get shocked. They won't go down it again. Then they'll go down the fire, they'll get burnt, they won't go down it again, they'll go over to a place where it's safe. Human beings will go down and get shocked and shocked and shocked over and over and over again. So you could say rats are a lot smarter than us. But anyway, eating a healthy, plant-based, gluten-free diet gives you, and this is based on the medical literature, a 66% lower probability of being asthmatic, 54% more protection against asthma, 40% lower risk of wheezing, cuts asthma and allergy incidence in half, protects you against asthma incidence, and lowers your respiratory inflammation. So all these different things that we know can literally wipe out so many cases and causes of asthma with our children and with us as adults in New Zealand, simply by eating more plants, particularly leafy green vegetables. The other side of the coin, when you actually look at kids who are eating rubbish, kids who eat one hamburger a week, 100% more likely to suffer wheezing. It's just one hamburger a week will do that. 75% more likely to have asthma. And I'm a classic example. As soon as I got off it, asthma went away. In one study alone, half of the children and a third of the adults were found to have an unknown food intolerance to wheat and gluten of asthmatics. This was a massive study of asthmatic children. They found that a half to a third actually had gluten intolerance without being distinguished. With asthma, you're 3 times more likely to die young if you have gluten problems and you continue to eat gluten. So again, one of those basic, simple pieces of advice to you if you've got respiratory or asthmatic problems would be to give up gluten-containing foods. Gluten intolerance is growing. It's not something that's going backwards, it's going forwards, it's growing enormously. It's now 4 times more common than it was 40 years ago. It's why you hear about gluten-free this and gluten-free that, and you're in the supermarket now, you'll notice there's gluten-free aisles and there's gluten-free foods of all sorts. And if you're unaware of it, and this is one of the scariest things about gluten intolerance, if you're unaware of it, you have a 4-fold increase in your risk of death. So 4 times higher likelihood of dying because of complications to do with gluten intolerance if you're unaware of it. 1 in 7 people have been diagnosed correctly, so most people don't have the right diagnosis. And the modern high gluten grain-based diet was simply not part of the diet of previous generations. They had an enormous range of grains in their diet, whereas we just have 1 to 3 different grains of wheat, which give us an enormous high level of gluten. And it's made because it's very spongy, and we love that sponginess. You know, I remember as a kid, I used to go to the dairy down the road, and my sister and I would get a couple of loaves of white bread as a Sunday treat in the morning, and would ride home on the bike, and by the time we got home, there'd be no white bread left inside. You know, there was just the crust. Do you remember doing that? Yeah, there was just the crust, because we would eat it, and my dad would always go, "Oh, ho, ho, I guess the mice have got to it," and we'd have this little joke, you know, and then we'd have to go back and buy another one. So, but that addictive nature was phenomenal. My sister and I would literally eat one entire loaf of white bread and not feel satiated at all, just in the small bike ride from the shop to home. I remember doing it over and over again. The average diet kills most people. We know that. We know that the Western diet is just deadly. That's why the death rates are so high in all the Western countries. 40% of Kiwis have allergies. We know 1 in 4 Kiwis have a distinguished food allergy. I'm a classic. I'm one of those with a bivalve allergy. And the incidence is growing also drastically. And white bread increases your risk of allergies and increases dramatically, and we'll go over that shortly within the gut. White bread doubles your risk of heart disease just by having a white bread diet. A massive study done 2 years ago showing the highest white bread intake, double the rates of heart attacks. And white bread significantly increases colon cancer and breast cancer risk. So there's an enormously negative impact in your genetic expression. And your genetic expression, of course, is all built in the gut. That's what gives you your health. That's what rebuilds your body the whole time. Every 12 months, you're 97% rebuilt. And where is it rebuilt from? Your gut. And what's that fed with? Your diet. And white bread causes damage. But the thing to remember here is wheat is not the problem. So don't look at wheat as an issue, because wheat itself is not the problem. It's the modern food processing that actually is the problem. It's the same old thing. Wheat itself is fantastic. I mean, when you take a piece of wheat and you soak it raw and then you grow it, it turns into wheatgrass, one of the best foods on the planet. You know, wheatgrass, nutrient dense, animals and humans can live on grass alone. It's an extraordinary food. And what is the key thing that animals do? There's 2 key things we know that all animals do when they get sick. Doesn't matter if they're a lion, a tiger, a dog, or a cat, herbivore, it doesn't matter, carnivore, herbivore, they'll do 2 things when they get sick. The first one is they will fast, they will stop eating, and they'll just drink water. The second thing is they'll eat grass. It's the 2 things all animals do to get well. Why? They need all that nutrition in the grass, the fiber, the chlorophyll, the biophotons, the carotenoids, the antioxidants, the vitamins, the minerals. All those different things exist in grass. And wheatgrass is just another variety of grass, only it's a very, very rich one. So wheat itself is not the problem, but it's what we do with wheat. So as an example, the first 20 years of my life, bad asthmatic, very unwell, sick, bloated, cramping, pains, mucus, blocked ears all the time, cold sores, sore lips, gum problems, low energy, all these problems on a very, very high gluten-based, meat-based, dairy-based diet. Change over to a plant-based, whole food, gluten-free diet, all problems gone. Just wiped out. Now it took 4 years or so, fasting and changes of diet, but gone, wiped out, clear. No coughs, no colds. I go through every winter now. I never get it. Now I'm your classic example of a high risk for respiratory. Caesarean born, very, very unwell when I was young, drugs and steroids from a very young age, and yet here I am now for the last 20 years, never getting coughs or colds or bugs or flus or viruses. So have my genetics changed? No. Has my genetic expression changed? Yes. How do you control your genetic expression? With your diet. So a classic example here is wheat. Wheat can be good and wheat can be bad. As wheatgrass, it's fantastic. I grew it as part of curing my asthma. I used to have 31 trays of wheatgrass on the grow at Waiheke Island at any one time, and every day I would move them around, I'd water them all, and then I'd chop a whole tray and I'd juice it by hand with this old juicer, and then I'd drink the juice, and I was a real wheatgrass nut. Part of getting really well, I basically lived on a lot of grass, and I'm talking the stuff you grow, not the other stuff, so don't take me wrong when I say that. But here's the interesting thing. I went off gluten, but I started eating the same thing, which is wheatgrass, but from the same plant, but does contain no gluten. So wheatgrass and barleygrass have no gluten. It only happens after it gets over a certain height, it starts feeding back to the grain, you get the gluten, but the grass itself is gluten-free. So it's not what the actual product is, but it's what we do with it. Funny thing is now my eldest son Trey, who's about to turn 23, is now making wheatgrass and grinding it up and working with old folks' homes, and he's taking it and helping people with their absorption and things, so kind of irony. Mark, did you have a question? At the end would be great. Actually, yeah, make a note if you could, that'd be great. So wheatgrass itself, very good food. Of course, it stimulates the metabolism, lowers your blood pressure. Any leafy greens will lower blood pressure, of course, leafy greens, spinach, celery, things like that. High levels of vitamin C, very good for balancing your pH levels. Fertility enhancer, proven now, very effective at that, and balances blood sugar. And the antioxidant levels, and the antioxidants, of course, are the part in the foods and plants that fight our aging and slow down the aging process and keep us healthier for longer, 20 times higher in wheatgrass than they are in white flour. Now they both come from the same grain called wheat, but it's what we do with it. Gluten-free as well, it's about 30 to 40% fibre. So if you're wanting good fibre, keep your bowel motions regular. You guys know about fibre and how important it is to increase your bowel motions. It's a great way to do that. It's balancing, neutralising, nourishing, alkalizing, very good for skin problems and very high levels of enzymes as well. So wheatgrass itself is a solid gold superfood. And literally you can, if you want to, you can juice your grass at home if you wanted to. Like if you really got starving and there was trouble and we couldn't get a food supply, and you could actually end up nibbling away at most of the things in your garden. There's a very small amount that are poisonous and very large amount that are edible. But obviously you want to know what those poisonous ones are before you go nibbling. So I wouldn't advise just doing that first thing tomorrow morning. Modern hyper-refined flour. This is part of where we go wrong. So we remove the husk, remove the germ, the bran, the fibre are all gone, and of course it's all that outer part. It's the same old thing, remove the outer part and we just have the stodgy white starch on the inside, and that of course causes the problem. So the bran and the germ contain 80 to 90% of all those good cholesterol lowering, blood pressure lowering, stenol, saponins, all those great things. We remove them. And then the beneficial essential fatty acids, the omega-3s, all those good things that we remove, they actually get broken down, oxidized, and become rancid. So then we need fish oils, and then we go and we take fish oils, and we had all these added supplementations to give us back those oils that we need. We actually take it out. And the vitamin E, the magnesium, the iron, phosphorus, digestive enzymes all get destroyed, literally. So you're talking what I call fat food or starch food, basically white starch. And that's what you end up with once you actually take all the outside off. So the question is, do you want to eat wallpaper for breakfast? And I don't recommend you do. Simply because the wallpaper paste is made of white flour and water. And I can remember as a kid putting up wallpaper with white flour and water. And you'd make paper mache things and all kinds of great stuff with just white flour and water, and they still do it at school. I can see a teacher there nodding and giggling, yes. So it's still done now. We know what it does. However, it does the same thing in your gut, and that's the thing to remember. Now the key ingredient in most glue used to be casein from cheese, which of course is pretty much a very, very effective glue. So when you actually eat white flour products, like a hamburger or a pizza, that are basically a whole lot of white flour, gluten-rich, fibreless, living digestive enzyme-less, devoid of any nutrients, then you mix a whole lot of glue with it from casein. You've got a double mixture of glue with no fibre. You really get a time bomb in the gut. You're actually eating wallpaper paste and glue. And that's a key part of what we're actually living on. So again, the white flour, part of the problem. So you eat wallpaper paste and glue on a regular basis, it will kill your intestinal bacteria. And of course, that's that whole part there that is part of the defense mechanisms that we have. Now going into winter, of course, this will be, for many of you, your first winter going into winter while you've been eating this way. And for many of you, you find you won't get sick this winter. And for some of you, I know, in fact, on our other Auckland program, we've got a gentleman there who he'd be in his 40s, isn't he? And I just don't want to mention names just in case, but this particular gentleman is in his 40s and he's just had his first winter last year in his adult life where he never got a cold. He's always had colds, always on antibiotics, always on drugs. His last 12 months he didn't get one at all. And he's absolutely astonished. All he did was change his diet, of course, and saved a whole lot of money as well. So it kills your intestinal bacteria, weakens your immune system, because your bacteria runs your immune system, constipates you, which of course then double bangies on your immune system, clogs up your liver and your gallbladder. And if you want to lose weight, you must have a healthy liver, and particularly gallbladder, but liver is very important. Ages you and dramatically ages your skin. So if you're eating a lot of white flour products with dairy products, that's what it'll do. The fallout will be extra weight, a weakened immune system, coughs, colds, bugs, flus, constipation, and bowel problems, and poorer skin. So advanced glycation end products. This is an interesting thing. They're chemicals, or they're called AGEs, or ages, that fast-track aging. And they cause heart disease and all kinds of other problems as well. White flour and extruded breakfast cereals are incredibly high in them. And the key thing with AGEs is you need to cook things at a high temperature and then distort them and twist them up and things. And when you do that with breakfast cereals, like your cocoa things and your cornies and your rice, anything that goes snap, crackle and pop, essentially, has gone through that process of denaturing. The more sugar, the more heating, the more processing of food goes through, the higher the AGEs. And the AGEs are directly linked with cancers, with heart disease, with inflammatory diseases, autoimmune disease as well. So do I recommend you eat foods that are rich in AGEs? Not at all. Now the interesting thing is, throughout history, of course, AGEs are at an all-time high now, alongside autoimmune diseases and other problems. They didn't used to be. But of course, what we're doing now with the food causes the same thing. The same thing with bread, the sad history of bread. Historically, it was always sourdough. It was always fermented. It was a whole food. It contained healthy protein levels, healthy fat levels, vitamins, minerals. But then snobbery dictated that white bread was the answer. Just the same thing happened in Asia, where white rice was seen as, if you were richer, you'd have white rice. And of course, then that becomes the thing where over a generation, instead of people having an education based on the nutritional quality, it's all about the snobbery and the marketing. So white rice is exactly the same. White breads were indicators of wealth and privilege. And of course, the white bread we eat today now has nothing to do with health at all. Nothing. It's about greed, speed, and money. And so when you see it, and when you see the top 10 things, I don't know if anyone here knows what the top 10 selling items in supermarkets are every week in New Zealand. It's the same as Australia. There's 4 food items that dominate the top 10. They are white bread, Coca-Cola, milk, and pet food. And those 4 are the top 10 every single week. It's always a 2-litre Coke and the cheapest loaf of white bread for $1.79 or whatever the special is. And then you've got another pack of Coke, then you've got 2 lots of pet food, and then you've got some more white bread and some milk and Anchor 2-litre milk. So that's what it is every single week. No fibre present in any of it, not one single piece of fibre. So commercial white bread is low fibre, which is very constipating. High gluten levels, that's what gives it its sponginess, and that's what makes it so spongy, and that's the standard complaint when people go onto a gluten-free diet. They say, I really miss the spongy bread. And yes, and absolutely, a lot of people do. And it's the nature of addiction. You actually miss that addiction to the sponge, because rice bread doesn't have that. Rice bread, if I threw it now, it would go through the window. Right? Some rice bread is like a brick. I'm only kidding. You actually get amazing gluten-free breads these days. But traditionally, when you'd go onto a gluten-free diet, you make your own bread. It was pretty rough. Now it's amazing. It's changed. White flour, sugar, synthetic chemical additives, salt, non-existent nutrition, trans fats, saturated fats, and rancid fats. That's when you break open the fat, you leave it, and it oxidizes in the air. That's what happens with white flour. And it's highly acidic as well. So this is the basic mixture of what you get if you're eating white bread. And it's one of the reasons I don't recommend you ever eat white bread again. It's the same with commercial breakfast cereals, are exactly the same. Exactly the same mixture of ingredients. Now, at this point, a lot of people ask me about brown bread, and I'll get onto that in a sec. But white bread sits and sticks to the gut wall. It rots in your large intestine, causes bowel disease, induces inflammation, and inflammation, of course, is at the cause of all Western disease, is always about inflammation, so we're always trying to bring inflammation down. Reduces nutritional absorption, so it stops the ability for you to absorb your nutrition in the gut, and the historical stuff of life is now the stodgy stuff of death. So I don't recommend white bread, particularly commercial white bread. However, brown bread's a little bit different, but it usually does contain white flour. So when you're looking at buying brown bread, if you are buying brown bread, if you've got a label that says wheat flour, that actually is a nice marketing term for white flour. But they're allowed to call it wheat flour. But you now know it means white flour. So don't be under any illusion. Okay? Where does the brown colour come from? Added caramel and molasses usually for browning, which gives you a brown loaf, which we then think is healthier. Again, it's all part of marketing. Very sad but true. Has not been fermented, and of course if you want the full absorption and the lower levels of allergenic reactions to grains, you must ferment them. Contains additives, contains AGEs, as I just distinguished, in pasteurized dairy products, and usually soy protein isolates in soy flour as well. So check on the ingredients list if you are going to be buying bread. Make sure that you avoid things with soy protein isolates, with soy flours, with pasteurized dairy products and things like that that haven't been fermented. So that's your typical commercial brown bread. Gluten causes tiredness, anxiety and stress. The medical world accepts it can damage the gut, but it also can damage the brain, skin and nerves. Until now, many of these illnesses have been blamed on everything from stress at home to other medical conditions, including depression. And this is from a world-leading expert on gluten intolerance from Dr. Rodney Ford in Christchurch, New Zealand. A real dude, this guy, real cutting-edge stuff on gluten. And what he's seen in his clinic is an extraordinary mixture of different symptoms. And it's one of those things where you get miracle results when you go off your gluten. Gluten actually comes from the word glue. No surprise there, of course, when you see what glue does to the intestines, but that's where it comes from. And it's a type of protein polypeptide comprised of gliadin and glutenin together, and it's present in large amounts in wheat, rye and barley. It's very, very good as a thickener. In fact, I'll put that down there. As a spongy thickener, and that's of course why we've used it, but it also is very good as a thickener for your waist. So if you're wanting to put it in your cooking, you'll find that it also will actually hang out on your belly and your backside. So that's what it does. Very, very good at thickening the human body as well as thickening your cooking. Most people are eating gluten all day, of course, as I distinguished earlier, from wheat bix, breakfast, lunch, dinner, all the way through the day. And again, like I said, gentlemen, particularly beer is from the hops family, contains high levels of gluten. So if you're on a gluten-free diet, you must not drink beer at all. So gluten basics. Gluten is a protein in almost all grains. It's another thing a lot of people don't realize. Gluten actually is widespread. However, the irritating and damaging glutens are only in those three: wheat, rye and barley. They're the ones that really cause the problem. For most people and most other grains like rice, very, very small levels of gluten. They're essentially gluten-free because the glutens don't cause problems as such. They're part of a family, but they don't give you the same issue. So this includes couscous, includes spelt, includes semolina, includes flour. And around 7 out of 10 people have a sensitivity. Much like dairy products, about 70 to 80% of people have an intolerance to dairy products in large amounts. They can tolerate small amounts, but not large amounts. Just a milligram of gluten per day keeps the villi healing away. This is Dr. Tom O'Brien, and what he was talking about was the villi, which of course are the little intestinal protrusions that suck the goodness out of your food in the small intestine. They get beaten down by villi. The villi get beaten down by gluten. And of course, the more gluten you have, the more they get beaten down. Then you can't absorb the nutrition, because what they're there for is to take the goodies out of your food. Dr. Tom O'Brien is fascinating. He's been studying gluten intolerance and gluten in wheat for about 10 years. And he found that a milligram a day, he was doing work with a nun. And she was on a gluten-free diet, and he'd worked with her for a year. She wasn't getting any better, and they're having all these symptoms. And she'd gotten better, but then she stagnated at a certain point. It turns out it was the bread that was being put on her tongue as a nun. What's it called? Communion. Yeah, the what's the word? Host. The host. Yeah, the host that was doing it. And Dr. Tom talked to the nun's priest, and he then started giving her gluten-free host, and all the symptoms went. And he measured it, actually broke down and measured how much she was getting gluten, and it was a milligram. And it was still keeping her villi damaged. Once you stopped that last little bit, it started to heal, and the problem started to go away. Now, this took a period of months, but the villi was still being suppressed by a small amount. It's like a poison, and you remove the poison from the environment, and there's one tiny bit of poison left. If you don't know what that is, it's very hard to get well. So gluten and gliadin are only one of about 35 different allergenic proteins. They remain globulins, gliadins, but modern wheat used in the pasta and couscous now, hence why Italy has got such a problem, of course, is 37% higher in gluten content. So we've got a much stronger, much more aggressive strain of gluten going into us every day. And the modern gluten is 78% pure gliadin. And gliadin, of course, is the extreme intestinal irritant that is the problem. So when you really look at it, we're actually eating a whole lot more in all the foods we're eating all of the time of a much more potent and deadly and dangerous version of gluten and gliadin every day. Now, on top of that, we're mixing it with dairy products, which also set off the same symptoms, and a lot of coffee, which also set off the same symptoms, and alcohol, which set off the same symptoms. So you can start to see how we've got this perfect storm working together of dairy products and high gluten foods, processed foods, rancid foods, alcohol, coffee, and dairy products all working together in our gut. And you can see where the problems start to come from when they all set off the same thing. Most probiotic supplements sold, of course, Italy. Gluten creates mucus, and too much gluten means that your stomach is unable to break it down. And in this situation, the gluten can arrive in your small intestine as what they call a foreign body. So the body will actually go, this is foreign, got a problem here, we need to get rid of it. The body then coats it in a protective case of mucus to try to remove it from the human body. This causes constipation, and then your digestive system becomes a breeding ground for yeast and bad bacteria. And of course, what do we put in white bread? Put little bits of yeast. So you get the double whammy again, yeast growing in the gut. Gluten and inflammation. The body sees gluten as the foreign invader and mounts an attack. And whenever the body mounts an attack on anything, it creates a barrier around it and causes inflammation. That's what tries to get things, makes the human body well, it gets us well, but also chronic inflammation over time is deadly. So what you want is the body to create inflammation for a short period and fix the problem. Like if you get a cut, you get all that inflammation around it and it heals it, and then the inflammation goes away. But long-term diseases like heart disease and cancers and autoimmune diseases are inflammation that stays and does not go. And when you get inflammation that stays and does not go, that's when you get real trouble. And that's what this kind of thing does. It starts in the lower intestines and then the small intestine. Once it hits your small intestine, the problem becomes systemic. It hits your brain, your absorption, your liver, right through. And wheat proteins often do not get fully broken down into amino acids. What we want to do is, of course, have our amino acids separate, so we can then build the amino acids into different things in the body, muscles, and all the different organs and things. So we actually want to have them as individual as possible. Animal proteins, of course, they're all completely bound up. The body has to try to break them. And in wheat as well, they're bound up. The body has a real hard time separating them so they can use them. So you end up with clumps of amino acids that are not fully absorbed or broken down, causing inflammation. Gluten triggers disease. We know that studies have shown that you're 700% more likely to die earlier if you've got colitis and you keep eating gluten. So in terms of bowel problems like IBS and irritable bowel syndrome and cramping, bloating, things like that, you raise your risk of death if you continue to eat high levels of gluten products. And there's only 3 triggers for autoimmune disease, which covers all those different illnesses. One is the initial genetic weakness. So you may have a genetic structure that has a weakness. I have one for asthma. Now, does that mean I'm going to be an asthmatic? No. Does it mean I could become an asthmatic and I'm at higher risk? Yes. But what then triggers me becoming an asthmatic is my environment. So number 2 is the environmental trigger that sets it off. And of course that can unset it as well. And then the intestinal permeability or your leaky gut. So if you've got a genetic predisposition for an illness and then you're in a certain environment that triggers it and sets it off, and because of your environment you've got a weakened gut, then you've got all 3 whammies, and that's when autoimmune disease kicks in. So all those 3 are the things you want to look at. Obviously the one you can't influence is your genetic risk. However, you can completely dominate your genetic expression, 2 completely different things. So gluten is usually the number 1 trigger for autoimmune disease, the number 1 trigger. Bowel diseases, kidney diseases, respiratory diseases, and autoimmune diseases, all the same, raised dramatically by gluten. Go onto a gluten-free diet, you'll see miracles, absolute miracles when it comes to mucus, inflammation, energy levels, constipation, cramping, bloating, gut problems. And I know a woman who was married to a man with type 1 diabetes. I know her really, really well, and she's very healthy, fit, active, the whole bit, and she married a guy with type 1 diabetes. We know that that's genetically very high odds of being passed on. So they had a little daughter, and the daughter was 2. She'd been on a gluten-free, plant-based diet for the first 2 years of her life, no issue whatsoever. On her 2nd birthday, at the 2nd birthday party, she was fed food. She was basically allowed to eat different kinds of food. So she had a lot of food that had wheat in it and dairy in it. The day after her 2nd birthday, she was diagnosed as a type 1 diabetic. One day after, the first time in her whole life, after living for 700 or 800 days, the very 2nd day after that, type 1 diabetic. And I know this woman well. She was gutted because she'd gone to all this work to protect her daughter, and then it happened. So very heartbreaking in that sense. Gluten intolerance. The more gluten in the food supply, the more gluten intolerance in the population. So the more, again, you look at Italy, the higher the levels of pasta being consumed, the higher the levels of gluten intolerance that you get. More than 1 in 10 people get negative reactions, even if they don't realize it. And again, the thing to remember with an intolerance or a sensitivity or a weakness, all the same thing, is it's something that wears you down over time. It's not something that you'll just have this massive reaction to straight away, but it's something that wears you down and you get sensitive to it. And what can happen is if you go onto a gluten-free diet and you're really specific about it, even if you do it for a month, then you have a whole lot of bread, that's when you'll notice it. If you actually go off it for a period and then have it's like coffee, go off coffee for 3 months, then have 3 cappuccinos, and you'll see exactly what coffee does to the human body. You'll get a real mega dose of it. So it's a really good experience to do, experiment. Over 40% of MSG is glutamate gluten, which is an excitotoxin, of course messes with your brain. And casein in cow's milk is also high in glutamate. So again, they have that similar kind of reaction and similar thing that we do see in gluten. Gluten intolerance has many names: sensitivity, hypersensitivity, non-celiac intolerance, non-celiac gluten insensitivity, gluten syndrome, gluten-induced entropy, a whole different mixture of things, non-tropical spew. So all these different things all mean the same thing, which you have an intolerance to gluten. So any of these things could mean it. And gluten intolerance has been increasing. Even mainstream doctors and scientists are now acknowledging and accepting it. Antonio Di Sabatino in the Annals of Internal Medicine. This is fascinating because this is, as you can see from the date, it's about 6 days old. This release came through. International news release. More patients have been reporting a resolution of symptoms with a gluten-free diet, even though they have never tested positive for celiac disease. So this is what's starting to be happening a lot. We're starting to see it in the testing clinics all over the world now, where you're not a celiac, which means that you react badly to gluten, but you actually react much better to a gluten-free diet because you're intolerant. Another study said the same thing. A gluten-free diet brought relief to patients who had gastrointestinal symptoms but did not have confirmed celiac disease. Same thing again. Gluten worsened functional symptoms in celiac-free patients. These are all direct quotes from recent mega studies that I'm giving you. The New England Journal of Medicine, same thing. 1995, wheat or gluten ingestion has been demonstrated in double-blind studies of patients. And Walter Coyle, a doctor in California, gastroenterologists, they're people that specialize in this part of the human body, have been struggling with gluten sensitivity for the last decade. There are a whole host of people who do not meet celiac criteria but have symptoms with gluten. So again, you're not a celiac, but very, very widespread. And it's happening all around the place. So what is celiac disease? For those that don't understand, it's an autoimmune reaction caused by gliadin, which is in gluten, triggering destruction of the intestinal lining of the villi. And like I said earlier, villi are those little fingers that are your small intestine, and they absorb the nutrition out of your food. They grab it and they remove it, give it to the blood so the body can have the goodness. Very important to have healthy villi. Works alongside your intestinal bacteria. If you've got total villus atrophy, which is when the villi die off and there's no villi, then you have celiac disease. And then you're in trouble. You cannot eat anything for the rest of your life then with gluten in. Being a celiac, if undiagnosed, can be one of the most frustrating illnesses there is. I know there's a friend of mine who suffers from it, and here's the amazing thing about it. It's incredibly frustrating, incredibly debilitating, because it can lead to depression, to very, very strong emotional mood swings, unpredictable behavior. It has an enormous impact on the brain because all the brain proteins are created the whole time. Your brain is built from your gut. Of course, the connection between the gut and the brain, it's where gut instinct and all my gut feeling, and your brain is run by your gut. So when you've actually got an irritated gut all the time and it's constantly being irritated by your food, your brain goes out and your emotions go haywire. Now this friend of mine, he had problems for ages with it, and when he actually finally had it diagnosed, his first reaction was, oh no, this is terrible, it's such a drama, I've got a celiac disease. And he got given a card which he takes with him saying, I'm a celiac, to restaurants, and he hands it to the waiters, and very, very big dramatic reaction he had to it. And I remember I was talking with him and I said, you're a celiac? And he said, yeah. And I said, so now all your symptoms you had your whole life are gone? And he goes, yeah. And I said, all you had to do was give up one food. And he goes, yeah. And I said, man, you are so lucky. How lucky are you? And he looked at me like I was like some weirdo. But when you think about it, imagine if you had a disease, whatever it is that bothers you, and if you just stopped eating tomatoes, cured. That's what celiac disease is. It's that easy to cure. So, the way you look at it, of course, is how you get the reaction from it. So we had a good chat about it, One of the interesting things about gluten and celiacs is Novak Djokovic. I don't know if many of you realize this, but in 2008, Andy Roddick publicly mocked him. He talked about him at a conference, after a tennis game, saying he's got a lot of potential, this kid, but he never lasts. He always gets sick. He's always got coughs and flus and colds, and he's not physically able to last in a match. And he always got beaten. In 2010, he went to a nutritionist who diagnosed him as a celiac. Now, interestingly enough, what's happened to Novak Djokovic over the last 2 years since he got diagnosed as a celiac and stopped eating gluten? Is he now weak anymore now? Is he sick anymore? No. Since then, he's won 4 Grand Slams. He's the most feared, unpredictable, scary, dominant tennis player on the planet. Rafael Nadal and Roger Federer are now fighting to see who can come second in any game. They're fighting for second place. He's just completely dominant. He's unbeatable. In 2012, he beat Andy Murray in almost 5 hours at the Australian Open, only a matter of whenever it was, a month ago, 6 weeks ago. And then 2 days later, he beat Rafael Nadal in 6 hours. So that's 11 hours of the most intense exercise-based, strenuous, high-stress impact exercise you would ever go through. And he did it 2 times over 2 days. That is not weakness, that is real strength. And what did he do? He gave up gluten. It's one of those fascinating little things where you start to see the cutting-edge athletes. If you need that little extra edge, one of those things he did. So anemia and osteoporosis, very common. I know some of the people here are struggling with this, and some people have that in their families. It's common, very, very common in celiacs because the poor absorption of iron and other nutrients happen in the gut. 2 tablespoons of wheat bran, for example, can halve your calcium absorption for the day. Now, if you're having 2 Wheat Bix, that's going to annihilate your iron absorption for the day. So for some people, you cannot eat gluten if you're wanting to have a good uptake of iron. And for those people that are anemic or osteoporotic, getting off gluten is usually the first step. Because what we tend to do with anemia is we look at it and we go, okay, well, we'll give you a supplement or an injection with high levels of iron. We'll give you lots of meat. Now, generally, that doesn't fix the problem. And I've dealt with people and I've worked with them where they've been having injections, they've been on a high meat diet, they're still not getting the iron. Whereas you put them on a plant-based diet and you remove the triggers and their gut starts to rebuild and suddenly their iron levels go through the roof. You can increase iron levels by 20 or 30 points within about 5 days on a plant-based diet. And we know, of course, the rural Chinese get about 36 milligrams of iron a day eating plants. Americans get about 18 milligrams a day eating meat. So in terms of absorption, the myth about needing to eat a lot of meat to get your iron is completely bogus. I haven't eaten meat for 26 years. My iron levels are probably higher than anyone's in the room. And so in terms of iron levels, you can get very, very good levels from plants. So don't be fooled in that sense. The other thing about this is inflammatory bowel disease also leads to a vitamin D deficiency, and inflammatory bowel disease can often be sorted and started by gluten and bread products. So you can end up with a disease which not only gives you a problem in the bowel, but then stops you absorbing vitamin D, which then weakens your immune system. Of course, we know vitamin D runs your immune system. It's one of those crucial modulators to keep you healthy. Also run down, leading to osteoporosis. Because if you've got a lack of vitamin D and calcium, that's almost a guaranteed road down to osteoporosis. People with osteoporosis are 10 times more likely to be celiacs. So if you do know people who are osteoporotic, who have got bone problems, get themselves tested for celiac disease and get them go through a routine of testing for gluten intolerance as well. Very important. Autoimmune disease, type 1 diabetics have the same genetic vulnerability. So if you have type 1 diabetes in the family, you've got the same weakness and expectation as celiac disease. So again, staying off gluten as a lifetime choice is a very smart thing to do. And this is why celiac disease, people have 10 times higher rates of autoimmune disease. So things like type 1 diabetes, psoriasis problems, MS, schizophrenia, that kind of thing. So again, it's why I recommend people, look, if you're going to go on to a plant-based gluten-free diet, do it well. Don't skirt around the edges of it. If you want to get the result, really play hard. Go, you know what? Here is a box with all the foods that don't contain gluten, and here's gluten. I eat this stuff. It's really that simple. I eat this stuff here that doesn't contain gluten, this stuff I don't eat, and see what happens. So it's really a case of you do have to be that black and white about it. You can't skirt around it. As I said earlier, 1 milligram a day is enough to set you off. So if you're going to go off it, make sure you do it well. Complete and total curing of these diseases is common now in the medical literature. There's a lot of cases of it being reported. Strict lifetime gluten-free diet, like what you need to do if you're celiac. Most common preventable causes of death, heart disease, cancer, autoimmune disease. All 3. So why is gluten such a problem? Well, the wheat bran gluten gliadin is very harsh on the delicate villi lining of the intestinal wall, as I said. And here's the irony. As we've started lowering the amount of fibre in our diet, as the Western society has lowered and lowered and lowered its fibre content, we get advice when we get constipated and we get bowel problems. We get advice. What does the doctor say when you go to the doctor and what does he say to eat more of? Bran, right? So what does bran contain? Gluten, right? So you get told the very thing that's causing the problem in your gut, you get told to eat more of. Now that's good. It's good advice to eat more fibre. No question, the doctors have got it right. Absolutely, they've got it right. However, the kind of fibre is really important, because if you're eating something that's actually setting off 7 out of 10 people's guts, and you're going to get treatment for a constipation problem, of course, it's the last thing you want to eat. The acids from gluten leftovers can eat through the intestinal wall. This is when it gets acidic, and allows waste materials to leak into the bloodstream, causing problems. So your immune system doesn't produce standard gluten antibodies. So you can't actually get a gluten intolerance test. You can only get a celiac test. There's 5 or 6 or 7 different tests now if you want to get tested for glutenins and gliadins and prolamines and avenins and all these different things. You can get them done. But believe me, for the expense and the effort, it's much easier to just eat a gluten-free diet for a month, because that'll tell you the same thing, only it's free. And it's a much easier thing to do, and you'll lose weight and get all these great benefits anyway. So, you may as well try that. That's why I always recommend an elimination diet as the first step. Health problems attributed to gluten. I made a big list here, which I'll let you read, because I literally couldn't fit them all on a page. It's a huge mixture, and as you can see, they go from psychiatric problems to difficult behavior problems, to arthritic problems, to bone and joint problems, to muscle problems, to energy problems, to skin problems, to autoimmune disease problems, to headaches. So common for people to get regular headaches to be a gluten problem. So many problems are triggered at that genetic level by gluten and by the high levels of gluten that we have. So, there's an enormous amount in here, and you'll be getting a lot of this in the emails over the next week or two. I'm summarising all of this up for you so you'll get all this information as well. So what is the good news? Because I know a lot of you are looking very serious right now, so let me tell you there is some good news tonight. So gluten-based problems are 100% curable. Now there's a whole lot of diseases I talk about with people that are not curable. So this is the good news. You've got a problem, here's the solution. It's actually not unsurmountable. It's just one of those things you've got to get used to. Eat a gluten-free, plant-based, whole food diet. And that'll fix the problem. And it'll give you all these wonderful other benefits on top. Millet, quinoa, and buckwheat are seeds. A lot of people get this confused thinking they're grains. They're not. They're seeds. Very, very good, because they're not even in the grain families. They're just wonderful, wonderful seeds that are high protein, really good essential fatty acids. You can sprout them. You can do all kinds of great things with them. Millet we often have for breakfast at home. The boys love it. It's great porridge for kids. It takes about 15 minutes to cook. I think Tracy's done some recent emails on millet, haven't you? Yeah. Yeah, and I think I've done a sheet on millet. If I haven't, please let me know, and I'll flick it out, because I've got a really good overview of what to do with it and how good it is. But I recommend for at least 6 months to do this. If you've got any kind of ongoing malnutrition problems, any kind of fatigue problems, tiredness or bowel issues, digestive stomach issues of any kind. Now, I've been on a gluten-free diet essentially for 20 plus years. Now, occasionally I have problems or have situations, and funnily enough, very funny story, which probably now is a funny time to tell you, because Tracy was preparing a very nice, delicious snack for you guys tonight. She's making a gluten-free cake, which she's bringing along. Now, this afternoon, while this was happening, I was feeling like $1 million this afternoon. I was on fire. I've been going it. We had late nights and all kinds of stuff, but I was feeling amazing, doing work and emails and all kinds of stuff. Went out for a walk in the sun. It was great. Tracy starts making this cake. Now, my father and my stepmother arrived while Tracy was making this cake today. And they arrived, and Tracy, in her confusion and excitement, instead of grabbing the brown rice flour to make the cake with, she grabbed the spelt flour, which of course contains high levels of gluten. Right? So she brought the spelt flour up, made a cake with the spelt flour instead of the brown rice flour. And of course, I'm gluten-free, so I react to it very quickly. Like, my body says immediately, no, that's not good. And here's the funny thing, Tracy gave me a few little bits of it. Now, I thought up here in my brain it was brown rice. So I ate a little bits of it just because she goes, oh, what's it like? And I'm bringing it along tonight. Is it nice? And, we tasted it. And she said, actually, it's not good enough. So she made another one, right? Did the same thing again. So it was quite funny. We were laughing about it on the way here, because straight after she made it and I ate it, I went upstairs and carried on working. And I went from feeling $1 million, in about half an hour, my lips started going dry. And one of the symptoms for me, and particularly for stomach and bowel, because that's your stomach, that aligns to your stomach, and that's your bowel. When it comes to your face and the relationships to the intestines, that's your heart here, sexual organs, stomach and bowel. And with me, I always have my problems on my large intestine, which is my bottom lip. It's always get my problems. And it's always about diet, and it's always about what's gone into your gut. I always get the same cold sores in the same places when I eat too much crap, which I don't do very much, so I very rarely get them. But I can create a cold sore in about a week by eating rubbish. My immune system gets run down and I react. Now, interestingly today, without even knowing I'd eaten some rubbish, so not even psychological, because I was like, this is great, what a healthy cake, yum, oh thanks hon, and I had a slice and off I went. I started thickening up here. As I started working, I had to find a handkerchief and blow my nose. And blow my nose for ages. So I'd suddenly blowing my nose, sore lips, all going like that, and I started to feel bloating in my stomach. And I remember working going, what is the story? Why am I suddenly feeling so rotten? And literally it took about an hour. And I came down and talked with Trace. We had a huge laugh about it because I said, this is so funny. I'm presenting tonight on gluten-free and bread and the damage it does and reactions you get. And here I am getting a reaction from eating the very thing. And of course it wasn't even psychological because I actually believed and thought it was brown rice. So really interesting. So I had a reaction earlier today. It was quite funny. And I can still feel a little bit in here. And for the first time, I've got dry lips in months. When I go all the way through summer, no dry lips at all. Bang. Within an hour. They're awesome. And I start going like this. So the good news is, that you can actually live quite happily in modern society. And the really good news is, because there's so many alternative foods available now, there's a real variety. Really, it's not a problem. It doesn't occur for me as an issue at all. I don't miss bread. I don't eat bread hardly at all. And, it really is easy to live on a gluten-free diet. Obviously, with kids, it's a bit different. And if they've been brought up with different foods, it's more of a slower, general thing to change. But it's very easy to do now. When I first started on it 20 years ago, really hard. There was gluten-free nothing. And everything was made on the same things with nuts and gluten and everything on the same machinery. So you get set off by all kinds of stuff. So here's the bad news. So the good news, it's easy enough to do. The bad news is wheat flour is used to thicken or bulk up everything. Sausages, baked beans, canned vegetables. What is baked beans? Second or third ingredient, gluten. Have a look at the label. You'll wonder why you get set off by beans, which contain no gluten, because the source is rich in gluten. So really read the ingredients labels carefully if you're wanting to go off gluten. Barley malt is used as a natural colouring, flavouring and sweetening, will contain levels of gluten. So if you're wanting to be gluten-free, go off barley malt as well. Sushi, unfortunately, the white rice is often with the malt vinegar rolled to add the flavour of rice. So if you're going to a snack bar and having sushi for lunch, which is often possibly the healthiest treat there in terms of the food court, that can also have gluten in it. So you check with them. Also MSG as well, of course, is highly sets you off the same way gluten does. Nachos and chocolate often have the same thing. They're rolled in maltodextrin flavoured powder. Maltodextrin, of course, contains gluten, will set you off exactly the same way. So avoiding maltodextrin. And hops, which is beer. So again, if you're a beer drinker, you'll need to give up beer if you're on a gluten-free diet, if you want to get the full result. There are wines and things you can have that are gluten-free, that's fine. Though I don't recommend you drink those either, but they are gluten-free. So if you're going to drink alcohol, go for your red wines and make sure they're gluten-free. Gluten-containing foods, there's an enormous range, and I've tried to put a whole range up here to give you a sense of it. Yes, things like most French fries, you actually have the ingredients of the mixture of fat and oil ingredients that are actually on the chips to give them that nice taste before they're fried. So it may be that they're cooked in vegetable oil, but they're still coated with a whole lot of maltodextrin to make them tasty. So just be aware of that. There are some really good places now starting to pop up, things like Burger Fuel. So if you really need a burger, you want to go to Burger Fuel, they can give you a 100% gluten-free burger made with tofu, and you've got basically nothing but plants in there. And they'll even distinguish for you that the sauce in there is 100% certified gluten-free. So you can actually find some places now actually offering it. So if you've really got to have a burger, occasionally it's great to have a burger, so you can get a gluten-free tofu burger if you want, and they're delicious. Lots of avocado and stuff. So they're all available. But be really careful with the pre-packaged foods, because pre-packaged foods are essentially gluten, fat, salt, and sugar. That's how they do it. That's how you preserve foods. You make them spongy and addictive. It's those four things that they add to everything. So gluten-free foods generally are your fruits, your vegetables, potatoes, oats, and I'll get to oats in a minute because there's a lot of confusion about oats, so I'll talk about oats shortly. Rice, corn, buckwheat, tapioca, quinoa, amaranth, soy, polenta, millet, whole range of things. Vegetable juice, spirulina, plain popcorn. There's a huge amount. And even now you'll find that dairy foods will come as gluten-free. So you'll find lots and lots of gluten-free foods. Now I've even noticed in the supermarket aisles now there is soups. Meiji do a range of soups that are gluten-free soups. So you actually get instant soups for the kids if you need them and they're in a hurry that are gluten-free, that at least they can, not get set off by that. But watch things carefully. The bottom line is if you want to be gluten-free completely, you'll find that you're cooking and preparing a lot more of your own food, and you're preparing ahead of time. Wheatgrass is gluten-free as well, and barley grass, so there are other superfoods you can have alongside spirulina. So oats are mostly okay. Now people get confused about oats. For years people were told, and it was right through our industry, that wheat, rye, barley and oats all contain glutens. The truth is actually that oats contain avenins. Now avenins are very similar, but they're actually not glutens. So for a long time people were advised, particularly celiacs, but they don't have a lot of those irritating cereal, what they call protein prolamines, which are found in wheat, all part of those 35 different glutamines and things. So they don't contain those. But oats contain the prolamine avenin. Now, for some people, oats can set you off, and some people they don't. Most people are fine with oats, particularly most Westerners are fine with oats. We have a very good tolerance for them. However, some celiacs do get set off. So it's an individual thing. Some celiacs are okay with it, some aren't. But a moderate amount of oats, and here's the interesting thing as well. If you soak oats, the reactions go down. So again, the whole soaking the muesli, which is what I recommend you do, you have your soaked muesli in the morning, lowers your reaction level to oats dramatically. So if you do have a problem with avenins, don't eat oats. But if you just have a problem with gluten, which most people do, then oats are generally okay. But they will, I would recommend, if you are going to do the gluten-free, I'd go off oats for a couple of weeks anyway, and then just introduce a couple of oats and see how you get on, because you know pretty quickly. But most of you will probably find you're okay. Highly sensitive types should avoid them. So what bread is best if I'm addicted to bread? This is always a question I ask, so I've saved it right till the end. So there's two kinds of breads that I recommend, and there's only two kinds. One is authentic rye sourdough bread. Now, before you go, but that's got gluten in it. Yes, it does. However, it's a very different gluten, and when you ferment bread, it completely changes the process. Like the fermentation takes away a lot of the hard to digest parts of it and replaces it with good. The protein levels go up, the hard to digest phenolic acids and things drop. So, it makes it a lot better. So the phytic acids drop. The original bread breaking process took about 48 hours at least of natural slow fermentation. And that's a much better way to do it. Creates lactic acid bacteria, which is fully fermented, which means it feeds your gut. So, and it pre-digests all the nutrients as well. So if you are going to go gluten-free, you must go gluten-free, so you cannot have rye sourdough bread. However, you might find after you go gluten-free for a month or so, you can introduce a rye sourdough occasionally, and you don't have a problem with it. So it's a matter of experimentation, but when you do go back onto gluten, if you do try it, make sure that you start first with authentic rye sourdough bread. Make sure it's fully fermented, and there's so many places making it now, it's easy enough to buy. I think you can even get it in some supermarkets, sell sourdough bread. And rye is very different. The authentic sourdough bread was always made with rye. And another lovely treat on the sourdough bread is avocado and miso. So again, treating your gut with some real respect. Instead of butter and Marmite, use avocado and miso. If you have sourdough rye, put some miso right on the bottom, beautiful miso, and then some avocado. It is the beautiful, sweetest, fattiest, saltiest, most savoury, delicious taste sensation. It really is extraordinarily nice. And you realise that it's actually 10 times nicer than butter and Marmite on normal bread. And you're having fully fermented food. And avocado is a superfood, high protein, high essential fatty acids, wonderful. So it's a really good other option if you're wanting to get yourself off the other bread treats, is to do that. So sourdough fermentation breaks down the enzyme inhibitors, delivers your nutritional components intact, strengthens the entire immune system, modifies and improves your food proteins, makes them much higher. Starches are changed to digestible sugars, and you ferment bread for about 6 hours, and the amount of folate doubles. So natural fermentation meant we didn't used to have the folic acid trouble that we have now. We've got all these folic acid deficiencies everywhere. We didn't used to have it because we ate sourdough bread, which has got very high levels of folate. Now, what's the other food group that contains high levels of folate? Foliage. That's where the name comes from. Folate is in foliage. There's 6 to 8 different folates. Folic acid is just one chemical synthetic copy, not even remotely close to foliage and folates. So the 6 to 8 folates that you need for good health come in naturally fermented breads and your leafy green vegetables. So anything leafy and green will have good levels of folates. That's where it comes from. It's foliage. And this would solve the folic acid issue. I was very opposed to having synthetic chemicals and additives added to our bread a few years ago, and I'm glad they didn't do it, because it's very easy to get foliage. Eat your greens. That's the problem solved right there. It's actually that easy. So, normal white bread has 0 fermentation, so no fermentation whatsoever, so I don't recommend it, obviously. Another one of those reasons. So gluten-free cooking tips, some things to remember as cooking tips, and I do think this is coming out on an email, is that corn flour and pea flour are very good for shortbread type cooking. So if you're making shortbreads, you can replace your wheat flour with your corn and your pea flour. Very good blended for baking as well. Arrowroot is a very good option for thickening fruit sauces and things. So instead of gluten, you can use arrowroot. Rice flour is best used blended with other flours, which is why you find often the rice breads will have a mixture of different flours, not just rice, because it tend to go quite hard if it's just rice, as some of you will know from making it, right, like a brick. Good for shortbread and pikelets, and ground millet can be used as thickening as well. and ground millet's really nice in that sense as well, quite a nutty flavour. I do not recommend soy flour, as you know. Very clear about that. Soy is a product that can be a superfood if you treat it with respect and you ferment it, or you add nagari and you turn it into good quality tofu or tempeh or tamari or miso. However, if you grind it into flour, it's toxic. So the whole drama and dilemma about soy foods being good or bad, they're actually both. They can be a superfood and they can be a toxic food, and it's all about what you do with it. Much like wheat, it can be white flour or it can be wheatgrass. Both come from the same seed. Soybeans exactly the same. So don't be too worried about soy being terrible. Soybeans can be great. So what's my recommendations at the end of the seminar? What do I recommend in terms of summing up tonight? What's my recommendations for what you do if you're interested in doing any of this? Number one, go onto a plant-based, whole food, gluten-free diet. Now, I know many of you are already doing that, but some of you may be still having coffee, little bits of dairy, and you wonder why you're not getting as good a result on a gluten-free diet as you might be. Coffee is the number one cross-food reactor. It will cross-react with everything. So it'll set you off if you're weak, it'll beat down your adrenal glands, it'll suck your minerals and vitamins. So I do not recommend coffee. Number two, make it a proactive health choice, not a drama. Remember the friend that I was telling you about, this friend of mine who had this big drama about being a celiac. It was all a big problem and he moaned about it for weeks, and we had a real good chat, and then he never moaned again because he realised how lucky he was, And I started talking about, well, look, what if you had leukemia? What would you do then? It's like, So make it a proactive choice if you're going to do it. Choose it for a reason. Don't just go, oh, it's a nice idea. Choose it. Go, I want more energy. I want to lose some weight. I want better skin. I don't want to age as quickly. I want to get out in bed in the morning, whatever it is. Or I've got bloating and cramping, or, I don't feel energized in the afternoon. Make it a proactive choice if you're going to go into a gluten-free diet, because then it keeps you going with it. You go, I chose this for a reason. And after a month or two, you'll know. It's pretty quick. You'll get a sense of it pretty quickly. Do it for at least 6 months if you can, and then monitor your results. Same as the, taste test. It may transform your health, it may transform your disease risk and your energy. Extraordinarily cool thing to do. And the best choice is to try not and replace bread. This is a problem a lot of people do. They go from eating a lot of gluten-based foods to suddenly being on a gluten-free diet, and they try to replace everything. So instead of Weet-Bix, they have gluten-free Weetabix. And instead of bread every day, they have gluten-free bread every day in the same place. And instead of having spongy shortbread, they have homemade pea-made shortbread. You see my point here? So you don't just try to replace everything. While you're going through a gluten-free process of changing, get to know different foods and go more onto it, get more fruits and more vegetables into you, and have your occasional treats. It's a lot easier to do, because otherwise you'll just get bunged up with a lot of other foods as well. So try to increase your leafy green vegetables and improve your diet as you change, rather than just trying to do a standard replacement. Gluten-free foods can be crap. So please don't think just because it's got gluten-free on it that somehow it's a superfood. Okay, it can be rubbish. Coca-Cola is gluten-free. Often French fries can be gluten-free, full of trans fat. Ice cream can be gluten-free. It'll still stick to your bum like cellulite, So don't be under any illusion of thinking that just because something's certified organic and gluten-free, it's therefore good for you. No, just remember it's what you do eat, not what you don't eat. So it's the choices you do make. Your body doesn't care about what you don't eat. It only cares about what you do eat. So remember that. Remember, it's the focus on what you do eat, not what you don't eat. Plan and prepare foods early. This is a critical part of being on a gluten-free process. You must prepare. You cannot, absolutely, categorically, you will not succeed on a gluten-free diet unless you prepare foods. You just will crash and burn. It'll take about a day and a half and it'll all be over. Right? You must prepare foods. You must plan ahead. Very, very important. Elimination diets are better than any test available. I was researching today on the different gluten tests as to what they are, because I knew someone would ask me. There's 6 different tests that I know of that you can test for gluten intolerance, and they all test for different glutens and gliadins and things. So not one of them is definitive that I've found. Not one single test, a hair test, none of them. The only real way to know is to stop eating it for a period and then eat it again and see what happens. So stop eating it, make a note of your symptoms, how well you feel, do it for a month or 2, and then have a whole half loaf of bread. Sit down and seriously stuff yourself with it, and you'll find out whether you've got a gluten problem or not. You'll get bunged up in no time. So the best thing I recommend is the elimination diet, or of course the Feel Alive plan, which is fully gluten-free and plant-based. So same thing. Either do it or don't do it. That's what I wanted to leave you with. Either do it or don't do it, but don't muck around halfway. Okay, so don't be partly gluten-free. And if you're going to be gluten-free, be gluten-free. And that includes, of course, I would recommend no coffee, no dairy foods, no alcohol, no chocolate, if you really want to test it. And after a period of time, then you can bring it back in. And for some people, you find chocolate doesn't set you off when you eat it again. Great, woohoo, we love chocolate, you know. Some people you find alcohol doesn't set you off. Woohoo, we love alcohol, you know, whatever it is. But if you do it at least for a short period, 1 month in your life, goes past like that, for no time. We'll be back here in a month, bang. I'll be able to say to somebody, how'd you go? And you went, I was gluten-free 100%. I feel better than I have in 10 years.